Remote viewing. Extrasensory perception using scientific methods. In this article, I will present one of the most fascinating yet scientific techniques for activating and utilizing extrasensory perception to obtain valuable information that is often inaccessible through other means. Many people probably ask themselves when first hearing about extrasensory perception, "Okay, but if this works, why isn't it talked about? And why don't organizations like the military or intelligence agencies use it?" Well, they actually do use it, or at least the intelligence agencies of the world's greatest powers have been using extrasensory perception for a long time. The history of remote viewing. The Cold War, which caused the threat of total nuclear annihilation and created paranoia on both the US and USSR sides, was a period when military intelligence agencies tried to gain an advantage over their adversaries by any means possible. In a situation of extremely limited insight into what the opposing side actually possessed, along with the disinformation activities of counterintelligence, it was easy to believe that perhaps the enemy had a secret weapon that might have put them years ahead. At that time, according to an anecdote, French intelligence planted a rumor with the Russians that the Americans had a psychic spy program capable of mentally penetrating their military installations and gathering intelligence information. The Russians, convinced of the truth of this information, began their own psychic spy program, believing that if the Americans had one, they must have one too. Sometime later, U.S. intelligence discovered that the Soviet Union had a psychic spy program. They didn't know how effective it was, but the reaction was, if the Russians have psychic spies, we can't fall behind in this field. It was decided to start a military research program and train PSI, spies, PSI, from the Greek letter psi, pronounced psi. In psychology, psi refers to the psyche. And in parapsychology, it's the designation for all paranormal phenomena. Research in the field of using extrasensory perception for intelligence purposes brought a breakthrough when in the U.S., Ingo Swann joined the program and developed remote viewing protocols. These are research procedures that allow scientific investigation of objects, places, and people beyond the reach of the physical senses of the investigator through the use of extrasensory perception. The two pillars of remote viewing. The first pillar is that the investigation is conducted blind. The person using extrasensory perception receives only a multi-digit number, which is the target designation, and doesn't know what object they will be investigating. This eliminates the biggest objection skeptics had, which was the possibility of suggesting the answer through the question itself. Throughout the entire investigation, the RV, remote viewer, doesn't know the target they are examining, yet they are able to provide information describing the target. Cases of the effectiveness of such investigations under strict scientific procedures used by U.S. intelligence are officially confirmed. We owe this fact to the American law requiring the declassification of military information after a certain period. We know that Americans successfully used RV, and there was a lot of confirmed material on this topic. The declassified information also inspired the creation of films based on them, such as The Men Who Stare at Goats, a somewhat humorous take on the subject at times, but based on a compilation of real events and characters, one of my favorite films, or Suspect Zero, a thriller. The second pillar of remote viewing is the division of tasks during an RV session. There is a division of roles between the perceiving person, using their extrasensory perception abilities, who, as I mentioned, receives only the target reference, and the monitoring person who conducts the session. It was discovered that one of the biggest obstacles to the effective use of extrasensory perception is the activation of analytical thinking during the act of perception. In other words, if we have an open mind and simply allow ourselves to passively receive stimuli, without internally judging them or pondering their meaning during the session, we have a much better chance of receiving true information. However, When we begin to analyze during perception, that part of the brain responsible for creative imagination is activated, which can quickly lead to the person creating imaginations on the subject instead of perceiving. By including a facilitator in the process who listens to or reads the information received in real time during the session, analyzes it, and asks non-suggestive questions, thereby helping to guide the perceiver to focus on interesting elements of the vision, fantastic effects are achieved. The perceiver, in a relaxed state, doesn't create blocks in their mind by analyzing. Meanwhile, the person conducting the session completely focuses on analysis and directing the session in the desired direction. In this way, a breakthrough was made in the scientific approach to extrasensory perception, removing from skeptics' hands the argument that the results of extrasensory perception are suggested by expectations or by the facilitators, as happens, for example, in the case of hypnotic sessions. The development of remote viewing after the Cold War. Perhaps you're now asking yourself, if U.S. intelligence successfully used RV techniques, do they still use them? Officially, the program ended with the end of the Cold War. Officially, the topic was simply inconvenient to publicly admit that the military uses parapsychology. Moreover, remote viewing was associated with telepathy, which in turn caused goosebumps of anxiety among officials and politicians on whom further financing of the military program depended, as they began to fear that some RV could read their minds. Although that's not exactly how it works, fear of such a possibility certainly contributed to sweeping the topic under the rug. Another objection was supposedly lack of effectiveness, despite many confirmed successful cases of obtaining intelligence information, which is noted in military documents. Indeed, the effectiveness of RV is not 100%. But is classical intelligence 100%? RV sessions conducted by Ingo Swann had about 70% effectiveness. 70% is still 7 cases out of 10, where information unavailable through other means is successfully obtained. Furthermore, nothing prevents multiple RVs from investigating the same target simultaneously. This provides an additional tool for verifying visions from multiple perspectives. However, in my opinion, the most important and absolutely fascinating reason was that during sessions, unknown beings and objects not officially recognized by science were accidentally encountered multiple times. During sessions, as described by many RVs of that time, they happened to perceive beings or objects that entered their visions and engaged them in conversation, for example. In other words, they entered a space that contains not only the possibility of perceiving our physical earthly reality, but also involves perceiving beings in spaces beyond our physical world. Imagine the confusion and embarrassment of the military and the RVs themselves, who initially were supposed to investigate some missile silo or enemy facility, and suddenly some luminous beings appear and try to draw their attention to something completely different, something they consider more important. These events, by the way, later initiated a whole chain of events and research that is currently being conducted. Moreover, a person developing extrasensory perception stops thinking solely in terms of following orders. Training people who were to be PSI spies by intelligence agencies developed in them perceptions and skills that naturally made them begin to see a broader perspective and ask questions about the wider context. In this way, many RVs began to explore reality on their own, far beyond what the military trained them for. These explorations were like a stone in the shoe for military intelligence, which wanted to have an obedient soldier spy, not an enlightened spiritual thinker. In this way, from the accidental decision to research and use extrasensory perception techniques for intelligence purposes, we have come to possess phenomenal techniques that can be used not only for gathering information, but also for personal and honor, spiritual development in a very broad scope. The declassification of information untied the hands of many remote viewers who had previously worked for the military. They began to publish their books and provide RV services as private contractors. As a result, the military still uses RV only on the basis of cooperation with private companies. Today, not only the military but many businesses use remote viewing services. They simply don't advertise it at all, and usually, the agreement includes non-disclosure of such cooperation. Some use it to get rich on the stock market. Others search for natural deposits using RV methods, and still others acquire ideas for patents and innovative solutions. All of this is entirely possible through the professional application of remote viewing. The end. Jakub Kuba Nigowski. The Star Embassy. If you like our work, please subscribe to stay in tune. Give the video a thumbs up and leave an inspiring comment.